Good to have you here, 3 and Out on the Southern Pigskin Radio Network. Kevin, BJ, and Ben, a lot to get to coming up here on the show. Major League Baseball and the players meeting yet again in Major League Baseball negotiations. We'll get to that coming up in just a little bit. Also, Bryce Kuhn will join us. He covers the Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets for 247 there at GoJackets.com. Also, Nick Buchanan, Houston Gamblers, former Florida Gator center, now with the new upstart USFL. We'll get his thoughts on jumping in with that newly formed league and kind of his expectations for playing there in the USFL with the Houston Gamblers. Also, Ben Ingram, Braves Radio Network, will join us, and we'll get the latest on the Braves as they go through the lockout. And a lot of work for the Braves to get done. I think once the lockout ends, the Braves will have exactly one outfielder under contract and no first baseman under contract. So we'll talk to Ben Ingram about that coming up in hour number 2 on the program as well. But fellas, new steps in the Major League Baseball negotiations. We get closer to a proposed deadline that Rob Manfred put out there of February 28th. And last night, Major League Baseball doubling down on that, kind of kicking it up a notch. And again, you say, well, why would they do that? And as Ben has said the whole time, it's negotiating. And that's what you do. When you have a piece of leverage to use, you use it. And that's what the owners are doing, saying that if you don't have an agreement by February 28th, Major League Baseball will begin canceling regular season games. And cancel means not being made up. They're not going to be played. And that means the players aren't going to get paid. And they're not going to make up the games, which means the players aren't going to get paid. So we just did this in the COVID year when you went from, hey, can we get 70 games in? Can we get this many in? To, nope, we're going to play 60. So players missed a decent amount of salary 2 years ago with COVID. How much are you missing here in 2022 potentially remains to be seen. But obviously, Ben and BJ, the owners, playing that card last night, saying, look, we said we wanted a deal done by the 28th. If we don't, obviously that puts the regular season in peril, and we'll start canceling games. And if we cancel games, they're not going to be made up, and you're not going to get paid for games that aren't played, obviously, to which the players responded, well, fine. If you're going to do that, then we're not going to agree to expanded playoffs, which, as I told you before, BJ, seems to me kind of cutting off your nose to spite your face a little bit. It's like, if there's expanded playoffs, players, you would make more money in that scenario as well. So doesn't seem to be like we're in a good spot here on a Thursday, Ben and BJ, in these negotiations.
I'm concerned. I understand, Ben, you've talked about kind of the nature of negotiations when you're a professional athlete, but now we have a day where they're saying, come Monday, if there's not a deal, we are not going to have a 162-game season. And I think that's been the worry all along. Listen, you don't like to miss spring training. That's not good for the game. That's not good for the players. That's not good for the fans. That's not good for, where the spring training venues and all that happens. But I think missing the regular season in a sport where the length of the regular season is a big deal, is kind of how the sport is defined. When you think about what makes baseball unique, there's a 162-game season, and kind of the statistical frame of reference you have with that, there's a reverence there. And to lose that, that's a bad look. That's a bad look. And I think that'll hurt the perception of the game. I think my fear would be if we get to Monday and you start the clock or whatever of we're not going to have 162 and now it's 159 and now it's 156. How quick does that become 142? How quick does that become 130? How quick do we regress down the calendar and sort of run out of games? And obviously I feel for the players who would be missing out on paychecks. These would not be games that you miss, and then when you come back and the deal gets signed, you get paid retroactively. This would be money lost, and that is extremely difficult. But I do wonder, and Kevin, you've talked about this, Ben, you've talked about this, if whatever the reason, if you miss a couple of weeks, a month plus, how is the public going to respond to that when there's a lockout? And even though there are obvious complexities and details and difficulties, if the argument is framed as billionaires versus millionaires, and even if that's not a true reflection, I know, Ben, you've talked about the average salaries in pro sports. I think people are going to get frustrated with that and say, I hear it. I understand it, but I want to watch baseball. I want 162 games of baseball. I want a full season. And right now it feels like that is very much in peril.
Yeah, it is. But I'm looking at it another way now, though. I mean, with everything, Kevin, something you said, the owners thought they had leverage, right? Oh, we'll start taking game. All right. And we're going to take the expanded playoffs from you. Because I think sometimes, too, you got to set a culture when you talk about the players and let these owners know, look, man, y'all dudes do this all the time. And think about what it really says. If we let y'all bully us right now in these CBAs, don't you think that's what they're going to do when they come back around again? Hey, dude, this is all we got to do to get them. And look, as a player who understands you want to get every single dollar, you kind of showing the next generation of players, dude, y'all got to play hardball sometimes. You don't look, nobody wants to lose games. Nobody wants to not get paid. I'm not saying that. But coming from a guy who has, if MLB has the worst communication of like a NFL Players Association, the NFL has the worst. The NFL has the worst NFL Player Association. You have them owners, Roger Goodell. Because what happens is Roger Goodell will take DeMar Smith. He'll say, listen, DeMar, this is what they're giving, and that's it. I don't want to hear nothing else. I think what happens is now, Kevin, is something you said. Them owners thought, hey, man, we're going to tell them we're not going to pay them. That'll get them. They came back and said, cool. And they told us, since y'all ain't playing us, we ain't giving you extra teams, extra playoffs. What? It's like they coming at them. So wait a minute. Them boys getting smart. We used to them saying yay or nay, not counteracting with something. Because make no mistake about it. Those owners wanted extra playoff games. Extra playoff team or expanded playoffs. That's extra revenue. But they telling them, no. Y'all don't want to do this for us? We're going to take this from y'all. Because they got to have, because what do the players have right now? Time ain't on their side. The revenue ain't on their side. What can they do to make them owners go, wait a minute, what? Yeah, so for those bottom feeder teams that had a chance to be one of those extra teams get in, that's not happening now. And guess what? Don't come back and say you want to bring it back to the table. So I give the players a lot of credit because unity is the hardest thing to do when you got a bunch of strangers who play the same game, but they don't know each other. Like if I play for Team X, I know of those other guys, but it's hard enough to get the 25 guys on my team to come in.
Ben, how much communication is there though between players while this is going on? I mean, how much back and forth and talk and guys trying to get on the same page do you think there is during all this?
0% when it comes to the ones that matter. We probably talking to each other, but not to the guy, not our rep. And that's the problem. The rep who's repping us, we're not talking to him. And the reason why it's hard to talk to him is we understand when we talking to each other, he's gonna start throwing stuff at him like, whoa, because you don't even understand he's privy to these meetings. And I think that's the disconnect. This is crazy. Most of the time, whoever is a rep on the team, unfortunately, they're not the best player. Like the best players on teams are not reps because they're the faces of the league. So I do think conversations are being had, but sometimes as a player, you don't even know what type of stance you're supposed to have. You don't even know how aggressive you're supposed to go. So that's what you use your rep for. Your rep is saying, look, man, like I said, CBAs are not just for the current players. It's for former players and future players. All that stuff is on the line. But I give the players a lot of credit because I think sometimes, man, owners are bullies. Not because they have to be, but it's just a natural thing. I'm gonna use my leverage against you. But I guarantee you, when them owners heard they're not gonna do expanded playoffs, that's what made them go, wait a minute, because now you affected future dollars, especially when the season comes to a close and you're talking about postseason baseball.
Yeah, and I think, again, Ben, I just wonder if both sides are dug in here. And as you know, if you start missing games, who does that affect? That affects everybody. I mean, at the end of the day, and again, when you start saying things like that, I look at it and say, yes, it's a negotiating leverage tactic. You're not going to get paid. Fine. Well, you're not going to make extra money. Well, if there's no game, none of us are making, anything, so to speak, on this thing. So hopefully these are tactics put in to make them give on deals. I know they were talking about minimum salaries. They were about Major League Baseball came in and said, hey, we're going to take it up I think I looked at about $60,000, $70,000 for the minimum salary. And it's going to go up from there over the 5 years of the CBA. Major League Baseball players said, no, we want like $110,000 more on there. So they're not close on some of those issues. Of course, they don't want a floor, which they think would create an artificial cap. I think, Ben, you've worked in the cap league. Major League Baseball is, I think, the only professional sports league in America that doesn't have a cap. And I said this to BJ, so I'll say it to you, and you kind of tell me if we're wrong in thinking. NFL has a cap, right? And they're what? Making record dollars.
Mm-hmm.
Cap has gone up.
Yeah.
NBA's got a cap. NBA's got record dollars. Cap's gone up. Players making more money. NHL has got a cap. They're coming back from a full season lockout, but they're making more money, gaining more popularity. The dollars are going up. Why would the players not want at least a floor or a cap out there and somehow think that they're not going to make more money? I guess just when you can point to other leagues that have it in place and they haven't had nearly the amount of strife, seemingly publicly, that MLB has, why would you be so adamantly opposed to a floor and or cap to make sure that teams are spending, i.e. giving you more money and trying to compete, and have a top end where the owners can say, okay, well, it's not going to get so outrageous where we're paying a guy $80 million a season to play Major League Baseball?
I think it's a good strategy to have. I do. I mean, because number one, though, but you got to make sure that last part is in, Kevin. You got to spend it. You can't just have this money over here because people go, hey, man, what do you notice about the good teams in sports? They pay money. Like in all sports. The worst teams don't. And you start saying to yourself, what are you saving this money for? It's not like you're saving this money to give it to a big name free agent. Big name free agents don't want to come to losing franchise. They don't want to do that. So I do think that, because I say this all the time, if you think the sport is good now, you take the lowest guy on the totem pole and you giving player X 100, 200 more. Because I'm telling you, they playing hard anyway. But you almost giving me another kind of like, season of baseball with this current contract. So I do think that I will say this. The reason why they're not going to do it in baseball is because, let's face it, the owners want to be able to say, we come up with the best ideas. We don't want to say the players did something because it looks like they're smarter than us.
I'm all for, I just think both sides. I mean, if you're good for the good of the game, a floor would be good because, again, for the players, it should be good. Like, they're not just going to say, oh, I have to spend more. I'm just going to give it to this guy. In some cases, they might, but like, if I got to spend it anyway, I might as well go try to spend it on a good player, on a player that's going to make me better. So I don't know why there's been so much resistance to that, but I understand the cap part where you don't want to just say, look, it's never going to go above this. And if we do, we're going to get a luxury tax because most franchises aren't going to want to pay that, right? Like, there's only a few franchises in sports who are like, yeah, I'll go over, whatever. I'll pay extra. It's fine. Not many are going to do that. I understand that. But I think that to me will be a compromising point of, hey, we understand you don't want to go over this, but at the end, let's get some of these franchises to kick it up a notch where they're not spending $30 million, which one guy makes on a whole other team by himself.
Well, Kevin, you mentioned compromise. I want to ask you this before we go to break. What we have here from Jesse Rogers, ESPN.com, multiple reports saying if a new collective bargaining agreement is not reached by Monday, games will be missed. And a spokesperson saying a deadline is a deadline, missed games or missed games. Mm-hmm. Salary will not be paid for those games. Do you think we have a deal before Monday or by Monday?
I don't know. I don't know because, again, I don't know how willing each side is to go to the mat. Like, I get a good sense for how willing the owners are to go to the mat because they simply have more money. How willing are the players to go to the mat? And again, it's all in how you frame it, I guess. But at least from what I've seen, Ben, this has been how it's gone. Owners, hey, we moved a little bit. Players, nope, we're here. Okay, we moved a little bit. Players, nope, we're here. Like, to me right now, the owners have at least made some concessions, and the players have not been willing to move at all. So in the court of public opinion, and again, I know people say, why you want to side with the billionaires? It's not about that. It's about, I just want to see baseball. I'm going to side with one side is giving, the other side is not. That's it. And so I think if you're the players, you have to say, are we willing to go to the mat for this? Because are we going to start missing game checks because we want $80,000 more a player? Well, at some point, it's kind of the situation you saw in the National Football League. And I just went blank on his name, the running back from Pittsburgh who sat out.
Oh, you talking about Le'Veon Bell?
Le'Veon Bell sat out. Okay, so we're trying to get $80,000 more a player, but by missing 2 weeks of the season, we just cost everybody in the league that's making minimum $80,000. So, okay, you did it, but you just cost everybody in the league, $80,000 worth of salary anyways. Is that worth going to the mat for? We'll see. And again, I guess that's the unknown part is how willing, if you're a player, are the players union willing to sit here and say, are we willing to miss 10 games? If we are, we'll go to the mat. Are we willing to miss 20? Are we willing to miss 40? Are we willing to miss 162? And if you are, what kind of damage does that do to prove your point, to get your deal done? I think that's kind of the unintended consequences of it all. BJ say we got to go to break. We'll come back. We're switching gears. We're talking a little football. Bryce Koon, GoJackets.com, will join us next here on 3 and Out, Southern Pigskin Radio Network.
Hey, I'm Brad Stewart, former Georgia Tech wide receiver and former Benedictine receiver, and you're listening to 3 and Out with BJ, Ben, and Kevin.
Good to have you here on this Thursday. Spring practice opening up in Atlanta for the Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets, and obviously a big year for Jeff Collins and company there. And joining us here from GoJackets.com on the 247 network, Bryce Koon joins us here on 3 and Out. Bryce, welcome to the show. How are you?
I appreciate it. Thank you so much. I'll tell you one thing. There really is no such thing as an off season because this is an early time to have spring practice. But we don't mind it because it gives us even more content to talk about.
Absolutely. And Bryce, I understand that Jeff Collins wanted to go earlier because there's so much transition on the staff, on the roster with new offensive coordinator coming in, so many guys transferring out, a lot of guys transferring in that wanted to have as much time as possible to kind of get everybody up to speed, so to speak.
Yeah, and that's one of the big things when we talk with Jeff Collins about it. I mean, that he wanted to install things so that one, this group could have a good idea of what they want to do earlier on, and be able to work on some of the things over summer on their own time or on workouts, getting together. But I'll tell you one thing, guys. One of the biggest aspects of this is kind of this new age of college football that we're in. It's to really assess and to see what you can do to transfer portal. Because listen, the transfer portal, I liken it to a lot like Major League Baseball post spring training, the waiver deals. They get put on waivers and guys get picked up right before opening day. That's going to happen. So one of the things that you may not see coaches officially say it, but we can also know that they're attempting and trying to see what they have and then essentially scout the portal well before other teams have even started spring practice. So that is a little bit of an advantage that I think is kind of trending with this new age of college football.
Bryce, Georgia Tech's not been able to have consistent success yet under Jeff Collins. I know it's just spring, but looking ahead to this fall, is there pressure on Jeff Collins, and is that a storyline at all here in the spring?
Oh, listen, I mean, of course it is. I mean, I know that Georgia Tech don't maybe have the hype or the expectations that programs around them, but that very thing is kind of what's driving some of the fire that's on the hot seat of Jeff Collins. I mean, listen, you're in the what many argue is the capital of college football. The College Football Hall of Fame's right there. You have a Chick-fil-A kickoff game. You got a bowl game. You have the SEC championship, and you're smack dab in the middle between Tuscaloosa and Athens. And that's two of the biggest programs, and just so happens to be the two programs that played for a national title. So the fan base, the donors, they want to see results and kind of this transition. I'll say this. I think a lot of people are really figuring out how far back Georgia Tech was operating as a program, and it's been some really tough growing pains the first kind of 3 seasons of this era.
Bryce, how much can a guy like Jeff Sims benefit from a guy like Chris Winker, who not only coached a position, but obviously played the position and won the Heisman?
Yeah, I think that's going to have some big impact on Jeff Sims. He's a guy that has all the intangibles. He's got the God-given talent to be what I think is his potential is one of the, top quarterbacks in that conference. That's what's on paper. But as you guys know, and you have to be able to live up that potential and be developed. And I think that was the missing piece for Jeff Sims. Now, a big part of it was the offensive line that was really lacking true Power 5 material guys. And I think they're starting to get there. But the biggest thing, and you pointed out, was Chris Winkie, a guy that's been there, done that. He's felt the pressure of big-time games. To be able to put that into your program, I don't think that you're ever going to say, no, we don't want that. And so I think it really does help this, especially that quarterback room, that's going to need Jeff Sims or anyone else, that Gibson, the transfer from Akron, to step up and be a leader on that offense.
You talk about that offense, Bryce, as Chip Long comes in to take over the offensive coordinator spot. How important is it just to have an identity on offense, whatever it is that's going to be? Because it seemed like so many times under the previous coordinator, just didn't have a lot of seemingly consistent identity. Sometimes where, you get down on the goal line, I believe against Clemson, and your best player wasn't even on the field. How important is it to have just some kind of consistent kind of concept and identity that's clear for everybody of what you're trying to do?
Well, and I keep pointing back to the two teams that were in the national championship. And then when you look across the elite teams of college football, what do? They know what they do, and they do it well. And Georgia Tech has to figure that out. And I think with having Chip Long coming into the equation, this is a guy that, he's not going to, light the radar on fire by any means. But I think the biggest thing is what he can do is that he can take this group that was below average, and you guys hit on it. They did not have an identity, and at least give them one and give a big, a building block to something that they want to do down the road. And they need that. I mean, whether, we've known Georgia Tech as the team that runs a triple option. They've kind of made this push, and they've got a lot of great pieces. They've got a lot of good skill position players. The running back room has just been a revolving door, but they've still got some really, really good pieces there. They've got a young tight end that I think is kind of a hybrid between a tight end receiver. They've got some really good pieces, but it's how do they fit the puzzle? And I think one thing when we talked to Chip Long at his opening press conference was he wants to obviously do what he's going to do in his plan, but he's also got to tailor it to the players that are there currently. It's unfair to do that and have this where the players can't live up. Maybe their skill set doesn't fit that. And so finding that identity, whether it's a run first or we're going to work off of that, which is essentially Chip Long loves to use the tight end and he wants to run the football and be physical. And that's something that is going to be tasked with an offensive line under Brent Key. They want to be able to play a more physical brand of football and to get these running backs involved, not only just in the run game, coming out of the backfield, though, as a pass catcher as well.
How can Georgia Tech more consistently make plays on defense?
Well, first off, it's communication. If you go back and watch some of the film, and we have over at GoJackets.com and kind of seen what they've done, it's the lack of communication on that group. There were oftentimes, listen, there are some guys in the conference and across the nation, and Georgia Tech plays a tough schedule that are just better than you. And sometimes you have to look across the line and say, I know that guy's better than me, but I've got to come up with something different. And too often last year, whether they didn't have the talent to match up or they didn't just straight up have it, there were too many busted coverages, way too many, and not enough to where you say, oh, they got us on a good play. We're talking about continuously repetitive being out of position. So communication pre-play is one of the biggest things. And I think they did a good job of simplifying that. I think Coach Tillman is going to be a really big addition in that defensive backfield for them. Really like what he brings to the table. And they're simplifying these things. And I think that's important because you have to understand these are, 17, 18, 19-year-old kids a lot of times. And Georgia Tech still has one of on the rosters that's on the younger side. But for Georgia Tech, I think that in order to play more consistent defense, you've got to have the pre-snap. You got to know what you're doing pre-snap. If you don't know what you're doing, you might as well not be on the field. I mean, it's one of those things. You got to know what you're going to do. You got to know what your job is, but you've also got to play free. And I think when you know what your job is, it allows you to play free, allows you to play freely and smoothly, and you can be able to make some plays. So baseline knowing what your job is in each individual position at all 11 of those, I think that's going to help this team and just have a more concerted effort, just kind of meshing everything together. Kind of felt like at times that everyone's kind of spread out in their different position groups. I think now they've kind of come into that. They don't have a separate defensive end coach from a defensive line. They don't have a safety guy coaching safeties and a guy coaching corners. It's defensive back. It's back to more of the traditional groups, and I feel like that's something that's going to help kind of get that message all on one page.
Bryce, how much of this spring is going to be about, like you said, just getting back to basics? I think sometimes people think you got to have these super complicated defenses, offenses, special teams. But look, man, take the best 11 you got, put them in a position to go out there and succeed, like you mentioned. That way they can just read and react, and they're not there. They're not out there trying to just think their way through it all the time.
You hit the nail right on the head. And talking with fans, talking with other people around the ACC, they look at that roster and they say, listen, they've got 11 guys that they can put out there. They've got 11 guys that they can send out there and that can make an impact. But it's finding that combination like you talked about. And it's essentially saying, one of the big mantras of the Jeff Collins era is this competition is king. And listen, the guy has done wonders for the marketing and branding of the program. He's helping take Georgia Tech, which was an offense that relied on a scheme and kind of was, operating about 10 to 15 years prior. He's trying to bring that. But like what you said, if competition is truly king, then you're going to find the best 11 players and throw them out there regardless and let them play. I mean, these guys are all playing Division I, Power 5 college football for a reason. They're great. They're good players. I think we often, sometimes fans, we often get really over the top of saying that guy sucks and that guy's not that good. Well, listen, they're there for a reason. Are they being utilized correctly? And I think allowing, like what you said, to have a simple scheme and work things off of that is going to allow some of the players that I feel like that can really make an impact. It's going to allow them to take that next step, be more confident in what they're doing.
Bryce Koon, GoJackets.com, our guest here on 3 and Out. Bryce, really appreciate the time. Thanks so much.
Sounds good, guys. Appreciate it as always. Thank you.
Appreciate it, as Georgia Tech back at it for spring practice. And we appreciate Bryce joining us here on the show. Much more to come here on 3 and Out. Nick Buchanan, now the USFL, will join us when we return here on 3 and Out, Southern Pigskin Radio Network.
you doing? This is Eric Rett, former Gator great, and you're listening to BJ, Ben, and Kevin with 3 and Out.
Good to have you back here, 3 and Out on this Thursday. Kevin Thomas, Ben Troop, BJ Bennett. Thanks for making us a part of your day. Our next guest, former Florida Gator, offensive lineman taken in the USFL draft by the Houston Gamblers. Nick Buchanan joins us here on 3 and Out. Nick, welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm doing well, man. How are you guys?
Hey, we're doing fantastic. Speak to that experience. Yesterday, I know they did the draft a little bit differently, but you get taken by the Houston Gamblers, that new USFL coming up. Kind of talk about going through that process and waiting to see if you were taken in that draft, and ultimately the Gamblers taking that chance. Did we lose him? Can you hear us? May have to try to get him back there on the line. But Ben, kind of an interesting situation there where the USFL drafted by position. So it wasn't like your traditional, hey, here's the first round, second round, what have you. It was, hey, here's the offensive lineman round, take an offensive lineman. So that's kind of how the USFL did it. But we're looking to get Nick back on the line. May have lost him there for a moment.
Yeah, and it's unique though, right, Kevin? USL want to kind of have his own way of doing things, kind of like second time around. You want to make sure second time's a charm, and had a chance to speak with Nick a little bit, earlier today, just talking to him about like what it felt like a little bit, and he kept saying, "Look, man, it's still exciting, man. You want to be able to play professionally if you play college, Kevin. No surprise there. But the USFL, they went about. They had a long time to kind of go through the vetting process, and they went out there. Guys get to go to different cities, and hey, man, it feels good to hear your number call, name call. So big congratulations to Nick.
I believe we have Nick back here with us as he joins us. Nick, can you hear us?
Yeah, can you guys hear me?
Yep, we can. We can. First off, congratulations. What was the process like here getting to the USFL? Obviously, they do the draft a little bit differently, but what was the process like for you waiting that phone call?
I mean, it was just a Wednesday, recovery day, just chilling out. Was just doing some stretches or whatever. Ended up just hanging out at the gym I'm training at right now, playing Madden, following it live on Twitter just like everybody else. I saw my name pop up, and then I just, relaxed a little bit in my seat. It was just a good feeling.
Talk about this opportunity. Obviously, a big-time player for the Gators. Now a chance to play pro football, be a part of a league that has a lot of excitement. I know the social media talk about the draft. A lot of people were commenting about, man, you have some former college stars, and we're excited to see these guys play. Talk about this opportunity.
I think it's just, what every football player asks for, another opportunity to go out there and compete, just go out there and show what you're worth. Everybody's been working and grinding for these opportunities, because the besides the NFL and football, the opportunities are very slim. So, just excited to go out there and hopefully show everyone I have been working,
And Nick, when you think about the opportunity to be a headliner, I think sometimes when you think about the something like the USFL, you guys get a chance to go out there and be the first to kind of bring this thing back around. What is it like knowing that, hey, man, we get a chance to be household names, man, because it's coming back around. We want to go out there and put a best foot forward, and you guys are definitely coming for big-time programs.
I'm not really too much worried about, setting the trail blazing, becoming a household name. More interested in becoming a name through the circles of, the bigger leagues and everything else. Like we said, it's just opportunity. We're using it. But we're definitely excited to go out there and play football and represent the cities that we've been chosen for. And hopefully we do that very well.
I was going to say, Nick, what's kind of your expectation for the play on the field? I know are there wrinkles that might be in the rules package? What have you been told, or is that kind of we'll find out here soon enough?
I think I got to keep that one on the wraps right now. I think that's a we'll find out here soon enough.
Looking at the roster there with the Gamblers, I know Mark Thompson, I believe, from Florida, maybe a Florida State linebacker, Reggie Northrup. How much familiarity do you have? I think Tyler Simmons from Georgia. Do you know some of the guys that are going to be on the team with you?
I definitely know a few guys that are going to be on the team, and of course, just guys in the league in general. A lot of guys coming from big-time programs like we've discussed, like SEC schools and everything. And then, of course, you meet guys in training and all those different types of aspects. So I'm sure that the chemistry will click very fast. And I'm pretty sure everybody's excited to get out there and get to work.
I mean, Nick, Dunwoody, Georgia, Gainesville, Florida, Houston, Texas. It got to feel good knowing you going to a place that obviously, love its sports teams, but big city like Houston. I mean, how far do you look at moving to Houston?
Well, it's a bubble the first year. Everything's in Birmingham. Like the NBA bubble, they're doing the bubble the first year. But I'm excited for when we do eventually move to Houston officially. I got family out in Texas, Dallas, Houston, all throughout East Texas on the countryside and everything. So I'm excited. I have an opportunity to go out there. And then, like you said, it's just right there in the middle of Houston. The Texans are right there. It's a big football town. People get up in Texas for football. So hopefully, if we give them something to show about and show up for, then they'll come.
And Nick, I mean, you said you was working out, recovering, watching Twitter like everybody else. You saw your name pop up. It's got to feel good to know that your name is still being talked about in different circles. Because as you know, the same way your name got called, a lot of guys was watching Twitter. It came and went, and that opportunity didn't come for them.
I mean, yeah, it's a good feeling that when you're picked up, because I've been on both sides of it. Of course, when my NFL draft came in 2020, I went undrafted, so I know what it feels like to be just looking at a phone that seems to be off, but it's on, So definitely proud, and I feel like it's just a testament to the work I put in, just the dedication I have for my craft, but just definitely shouting out to the guys that didn't get called but are still working, because they definitely still got that supplemental draft coming up and everything like that. So I was just excited for myself,
Playing in the SEC, playing at a program like Florida, how did that help prepare you for this opportunity now in professional football?
I just think when you come up in a program like Florida, you just see a whole bunch of, let's say, freaks to use a better term, just guys that can kind of do things that aren't conventional, 365-pound guys doing cartwheels, 215-pound guys benching 405. You just see a lot of different things. And so it just kind of helps you always be on alert. You can't never take anyone lightly by the way they look or how they approach the game, how they approach their preparation. You got to respect everyone's work, because everybody gets it done differently, but it's all about how you get it done,
And Nick, I mean, kind of speak to that a little bit, what you said earlier when you said, look, man, I mean, I went through the 2020 draft. I went undrafted, but I stayed working out. I stuck to it. Did you know that the USFL would be an opportunity for you? And talk about that, just staying active, staying in shape. That way, say, listen, that way, if they do call me for the NFL, now USFL, I am ready.
I had no idea the USFL was going to come back. There's always talks about different spring leagues and minor leagues coming back, especially in the football purposes. I just was really working out because I felt like I never got that opportunity to show anyone what I could do, and from then on, it was just me staying in shape. I work at a gym. I'm training kids right now. I train offensive linemen every day. So it wasn't hard to stay in the football head, right? The same thing I'm telling them, hey, you guys got to go hard. You got to do this. You got to finish this. I'm applying it to myself when I'm working out, just stay in the course. Hey, guys, you might not be starting right now, but you got to keep working. You got to keep working. You know what I mean? So that's everything I told my kids. I just was using for myself.
Nick, what is it about the center position? Now, you mentioned you're teaching offensive line now. I mean, so much that centers have to do. How much pride do you take in being a center, being the starting point for an offense? And what's it like teaching that position?
I think it's I take being a center very pridefully. I got a lot of pride in it. Because a lot of times, the guys are undersized, but they're always going to stick their nose in there. But it's just more than the physicality of it. Like you said, you have to be the point man, like the point guard of the offensive line. Setting protections, calling out plays and everything. And I think there's a leadership aspect that I like about it. And when teaching about it, I kind of teach every position the same, whether it's a center guard or a tackle, right? Because everyone needs to be thinking the same thing. That's the beauty of offensive line as a whole. We're all a unit. It's rare that you have four guys who are terrible and one guy that's really good on the offensive line, because even though he's really good, he might not be able to show his talents, right? But you might have four guys that are really good, but the fifth guy, he might not be that good, but he looks really good because he's playing next to four really good guys, So I think just teaching offensive line as a mentality, as a whole, as a way of thinking, more than anything, is how I try to teach the kids.
And Nick, you talk about being able to take pride in the center position. Just talk about you talk about like if you got 4 guys that make one guy better, how much better does the one guy you at center make those other 4 guys, especially when you in charge of it? You obviously you setting the strength, you know which way we are sliding away, or to the protection. But to be able to say, look, man, that guy behind me that's snapping the ball too, I got you because I got these 4 guys next to me in sync.
Well, it's just like any other. It's a team. It's a sport within a sport, right? So we're 5 guys as a center. I have to make all the calls, right? So, when you're thinking about it in that aspect, it's just like, hey guys, I have to make them trust me first, right? Oh, you play center? Are you going to talk? Like, what's going on with you? You know what I'm saying? How hard do you work? You're going to try to be a leader of. I'm trying to be a leader of guys all 3 inches taller than me, 30 pounds heavier than me. You know what I mean? So I got to show them I'm here to work. I know what I'm talking about, right? So I take pride in earning those guys' respect. Same thing for the guy from behind me. He has to know that when I snap the ball, it's going to be there, right? He has to know that when I set a protection call, when I see something that, oh, yeah, he trusts it, he got it, it's going to be there, right? So when he sits back there and he sees that 7th guy coming, he knows, oh, I got a little extra second because they're going to pick him up. They're going to make him run the hump or something like that, right? So I can get this ball off. So it's just earning the trust of those guys more than anything.
Nick Buchanan, Houston Gamblers, our guest here on 3 and Out. Nick, really appreciate the time. Thanks so much.
Thank you guys so much, man.
Hey, we appreciate it. Best of luck to you moving forward as he is with the Houston Gamblers USFL coming back soon, as he said, going to be playing their games in Birmingham here in year number 1. So looking forward to that. Wouldn't give up the inside scoop on maybe the rules package or anything like that coming, but we'll see what happens when USFL comes back here in the coming weeks here in I think the late March, early April.
Yeah, and I think Kevin too. I mean, to think about a guy like Nick, right? I mean, he's the reason why you root for football. I mean, think about this. I'm staying in shape, not knowing if I'm gonna ever play football again. Making sure I'm passing it down to the next generation of players. When you talk about training kids, but now, hey man, getting to be in the bubble, getting to move to Houston. I mean, done. Hey, another Atlanta. I mean, I know another Atlanta boy. Kevin Dunwoody. So all I'm saying is I'm happy for guys like Nick. Because I think sometimes, Kevin and BJ, we get caught up in the NFL draft not realizing how rare that is. That's extremely rare. USFL, giving guys opportunities, happy for that, man.
And we've got more to come here. It's 3 and Out on the Southern Pigskin Radio Network.
Hello, this is Chris Hatcher, head coach of the Sanford University Bulldogs, and you're listening to 3 and Out with BJ, Ben, and Kevin.
Good to have you here, 3 and Out on this Thursday. Good to have on Nick Buchanan talking about headed to the USFL. A lot of players taken yesterday. Georgia with a number of players. BJ and Ben, Tyler Simmons going to be there with the Houston Gamblers. Toby Johnson, defensive tackle. Davin Bellamy. A lot of folks from Murders will play with the New Orleans team. Michael Barnett, Tyler Catalina is going to be on the Bandits, and John Atkins, all going to be playing in the USFL out of Georgia. So a number of guys taken that I think some people will have some familiarity with playing in that new league.
And Ben, as you said, I'm just really excited for these guys, the opportunity they have, the spotlight they're going to have. Already a lot of people talking about the games, the draft, the league on Twitter. So really excited for these former college stars, guys that maybe have been in the NFL even to have a chance to continue to play. Really cool.
USFL they ain't overthinking this thing. They say, hey man, who's going to give us the best shot to go out there and have quality football? SEC. So yes, they're getting a whole bunch of guys from Georgia and Florida and all throughout the SEC. But shout out to those boys from Georgia. Is that a prerequisite, Kevin and BJ, to how the NFL draft is going to look as far as like them Georgia boys coming off the board?
Probably. I mean, they had the best team in college football, and they have a number of guys who are ready to go pro. We talked about this a couple weeks ago, BJ, where 5-6 guys could go in the first round of the NFL draft out of Georgia. So no surprise they had 2, 4, 6 guys taken in the USFL draft yesterday. And again, that league coming back very, very soon. We've got Take 3 coming up right around the corner. Also, Ben Ingram next hour, Braves Radio Network, as the lockout continues, negotiations continue. Are we any closer to getting baseball back on the field? We'll break it down with Ben Ingram in hour number 2. It's 3 and Out on the Southern Pigskin Radio Network. Hit us up on Twitter at Pigskin Radio. Going to be here hour 2 of 3 and Out. Kevin, BJ, and Ben, glad you're making us a part of your day. Ben Ingram, Radio Network, will join us this hour. We'll get the latest with the players and owners and their back and forth that is taking place again, at least for the 4th day in a row today. So there's that. They have been consistently meeting, and we'll see how firm that February 28th deadline seems to be, as MLB coming out saying, look, we don't have a deal by then. We're going to start missing games, and you're not going to get paid for that. So we'll get to that coming up this hour as well. But first, let's take 3 here on 3 and Out. All right, BJ and Ben, we've been talking about different position groups here in the upcoming NFL draft. Give me your top 3 tight end selections for this year's NFL draft.
Ben, I defer to you here, man.
Well, it's a lot. It's a lot of, there's a lot of tight ends coming out this year that I really, really like. But I think BJ, Isaiah Likely is a guy that's definitely going to be up a lot of, on a lot of big time boards. But I like McBride too. I think McBride coming out of Colorado State is going to be big time. He'll be my number 1. I think Likely will be on my number 2. And listen, man, Weidemeyer to me, I think is the guy that's probably going to end up going number 1 because he got the size, got the speed, had the production coming out of Texas A&M. Likely should get a lot more attention. McBride is probably a guy that's going to get, is coming up the board. But Weidemeyer, I just had a chance to watch him a little bit last year, man. The guy has a size, 6'5", 265, can run. And I just think that sometimes, BJ and Kevin, when you start talking about having that production in the SEC, he had a lot to do with Texas A&M success last year. But yeah, Likely, McBride, Weidemeyer going to be my top 3.
All right. Yeah, I went Isaiah Likely number 1. I think he is a big-time difference maker and matchup problem. Ben, 16, 17 yards per catch in college. That is, you're one of the first guys at tight end to kind of stretch the field. Likely really does that, where when you're catching passes, it's 20, 25 yards, chunk plays down the field, where those design plays are not only to be kind of middle of the field seam routes, but game-breaking routes. I like Likely. I think you can move him all over the field. Give me Likely 1. I'll go Jalen Weidemeyer out of Texas A&M 2. I do think, 6'5", 6'6". I think he might be the first tight end taken. I think a lot of people have Weidemeyer ahead of Likely out of Coastal Carolina. And then I got a sleeper. I'm going to go Cole Turner out of Nevada, number 3. Why? I like tight ends that catch touchdown passes. He had 10. My guy had 10 touchdown catches, so has a knack around the end zone. I can appreciate that. So I'll go Isaiah Likely out of Coastal Carolina 1, Jalen Weidemeyer out of A&M 2, and Nevada's Cole Turner 3.
Yeah, I think you have a bunch of guys that have that that good size and speed dynamic that create mismatches. I can't really disagree with much of what you said. I would say the wild card would be Kolar from Texas, 6'6", probably the tallest of the bunch. So a guy from Iowa State to keep an eye on there as well. Moving along, take 2, Hawks and Bulls start the second half tonight. How do you feel about those playoff chances for the Hawks, who start the second half in the 10th spot, kind of that play-in position, if you will, in the NBA right now?
I'm optimistic, and this is a good test. The Bulls are tied for first in the East. I think it's a good test right out of the gate. We've seen Atlanta play well with Phoenix, play well with Milwaukee. So sometimes they've played their best basketball against the better teams on their schedule. But I don't think this team has consistently played its best basketball yet. I think there's still room to peak, still room to kind of find that next gear. I feel good about the Hawks making the playoffs. Now, is there a limit because of how slow their start was to how high they can get in the East? Yes. I think it comes down to Trae Young, obviously continuing to do what he does, had a double-double in the All-Star game, but you got to get the consistent production around him. Trae's going to do what Trae does. Who's going to be the second scorer? Who's going to be the third scorer? And then rebounding. It seems like when Atlanta's really good, they're rebounding the ball well, second chance opportunities, but also I think we sometimes overlook defensive rebounding, where you can get the ball, get in transition, get up the floor. I think that's a big key, and sometimes that kind of plays into your defense as well if you're not giving up second chance opportunities. But I don't think this team has played its best yet. I think they're better. They're more talented than the overall record indicates. I think they're still 2 games under 500. I think the best is yet to come for the Atlanta Hawks. big challenge tonight, but I think sometimes having a tough game can be a good way to come back after a break so that the spotlight's on right away.
Yeah, I do like their chances to make the playoffs. I think Trae Young and company, they're a team to where it's going to come down to BJ and Kevin, their defensive scrappiness. They don't have a defensive identity. I'm never ever going to say defense and identity. You know, isn't it the theme with the Hawks and the freaking Falcons? There is no defensive identity. They just try to go out there and outscore the other team. But I will say, if they could be scrappy on defense, you know, try to get some extra possession on offense, yes, I like their shot. And BJ, you mentioned going up against a team like I expect the Hawks. I mean, to win tonight because they tend to play better with better competition. They seem to play up. The problem is they can't put 2 wins together. So I do expect them to make the playoffs. Don't think they're going to have the Cinderella run they did last year with the Bucks, going to the Eastern Conference Finals. But because you did win to the Eastern Conference Finals, you definitely know how to win. So I see them making the playoffs down the stretch, but I don't see them going too far once they do get into the playoffs.
I know BJ wants to hammer me on the are they actually in the playoffs kind of. I think if you're 10, you're in that play-in portion. So I'll be consistent. If team 68, not in the NCAA tournament, if you're the 10, you're not in. You're not in the playoffs. You're in that play-in round to try to get yourself in to the NBA playoffs. So, no, I don't feel good about it being number 10. I need them to get up there to, 8, 7, something like that in order to improve themselves in their playoff chances. I don't like being in that play-in situation. They're good enough to be better than they are. We've been saying that all year, Ben, about this team. Talent-wise, they're good enough to be way better than 10th in the East. They just got to consistently put it together, and we'll see if they have one of those runs down the stretch like they had under Nate McMillan last year where they really finished strong. And if they do that, they'll be out of that 10th, 9th spot, and they'll be in the playoffs.
But the East is really good.
It is.
You know, historically, you think about the East, and you're like, oh, you can get into the playoffs even when there was just 8 seeds, well below 500. I think it's actually the opposite right now, where you can be in that 9 or 10 slot in the West, even if you're 5, 6, 7 games under 500, and you may not have 2, 3, 4 unbeatable super teams in the East. But I think, look, if you get into the playoffs after the start you had, and Kevin can argue what's the real playoffs versus the fake playoffs, but if you get into the playoffs after the start you had, it was I think this has still been a disappointment, but there's room to move up a couple of spots, I think. And it's tough because the East is really good, but I think this team can do it.
Moving along, take 3. Who would it put the most pressure on? And we'll talk with Ben Ingram, Braves Radio Network, coming up. Who would it put the most pressure on if the Braves do not re-sign Freddie Freeman?
Yeah, I was thinking about a couple. You think about Ronald Acuna coming back, and I think he is already one of the best players in baseball. Clearly, you know what he's going to do. Maybe Austin Riley, if Freddie Freeman's gone, it's kind of a corner infield. What would you do for an encore type season? But I think it would be Alex Anthopoulos, because the question would be, it's not going to be well received, right? Regardless of whatever the reason, even if Freddie gets a 7-year, $204 million contract, it's not going to be well received to lose Freddie Freeman. So who are you getting? Who's going to play first base? We had RJ Anderson on, who was talking about a couple of options. I think Matt Olson, maybe Anthony Rizzo, some names that have been thrown around. But if you lose Freddie Freeman, the expectation, fair, unfair, is going to be you better get somebody that's really good at first base. And you're going to have to do that. And part of this adds to the pressure in a very short window. With whatever happens with baseball, you're going to have a couple of days, maybe a couple of weeks to finalize your roster. So if the Braves lose Freddie Freeman, especially in this weird situation where you're going to have kind of a mini dash to try to finalize rosters all around baseball, knowing that you have the expectations of being the defending World Series champs, knowing that in this case you would have lost one of the best players in franchise history, and knowing that you don't have a lot of time, I think the pressure would be on Alex Anthopoulos.
I think it is going to be Ronald Acuna Jr. because the whole thing about it is, BJ, is you just won the World Series, right? When he was hurt. He had a lot to do with the season, but he wasn't there when the games mattered the most. When you moved over Chipper Jones, people were like, who's going to be the next budding superstar for the Braves? Freddie Freeman. I mean, and nobody knew that Freddie Freeman would be this good, this fast, but Freddie Freeman, I mean, we haven't forgot about Chipper, but you You name a team, you give me a team, and the name is synonymous with that team. Before it was Chipper. Then you go from Chipper to Freddie Free. If Freddie Free moves on, it is Ronald Acuna Jr. because the one thing Ronald Acuna Jr. had an opportunity to do, you had the best first baseman and one of the most consistent players in baseball on your team since you've been in the league. That kind of stuff matters because I don't have to be the guy while I'm waiting to become the guy. Now, you the guy. If Freddie Freeman's gone, it's on Ronald Acuna Jr. It ain't about 40-40s. It's about playing game in, game out, and you got to be the guy when the games matter. So I think it will be Ronald Acuna Jr., and I think he's had a chance to kind of get his feet on him with a guy like Freddie Freeman. And for those who think it's going to be easy to choose the field, guess again, because Freddie Freeman was about as consistent as you can be. Not a better player than Ronald Acuna Jr., but definitely more consistent.
Yeah, I agree with Ben. I think you could say it's Austin Riley. You could say it's Dansby. You could say it's Ozzie Albies. And you could do a number of guys. But the fact of the matter is, if the top dog leaves, the pressure, the focus, the mental energy, if you will, all falls to the next best player, right? I mean, so that would be when Chipper Jones left and retired, everybody started spending a lot more time at Freddie Freeman's locker. If Freddie Freeman is not on the Braves, the media going to start. I mean, they already spent a lot of time at Ronald's locker, but they're going to start spending a lot more time at his locker. You say, well, what's the difference? The difference is win, lose, good game, bad game. Everybody wants to see what Freddie Freeman has to say after the ball game. Win, lose, losing streak, winning streak. Everybody's going to want to know if he ain't there. Ronald, what do you think about what's happening with the ball club? Why didn't it work out today? And again, as a young player, that's a lot to handle. And I know I would say in years past, that would be less of a problem for someone who didn't have English as his first language, but he does interviews now. He's got the interpreter. It's not going to matter. English, in Spanish, you're going to get all the questions about what's going on with this Atlanta Braves team. And as a young guy, that's a load he's going to have to shoulder, but I don't see somebody in the interim that would take that over. You're the face of the franchise. You have the long-term deal. You're going to be here. Maybe it becomes a Max Fried or somebody like that, but I just think from a day in, day out standpoint, the next guy up, Ben, as you know, it's Ronald Acuna, and he will feel the most pressure of carrying the baseball team in the press and on the field at the same time.
Yeah, Kevin, and look, and that's how it should be, right? I mean, the fact of the matter is, right, the one thing that I can say is any really, really good player, he has a chance to become a great player when he didn't have to be the man coming straight. Like when you come into the man, I ain't have to be the man right now. I kind of got to learn the game. Yes, my talent is out of this world. I mean, everybody who talks about Ronald Acuna Jr., he's about as good as advertised. But no matter what, right, like BJ, no matter what, Kobe had Shaq while he was becoming Kobe. And when Shaq left, all right, Kobe's Kobe. He was ready, right? So I just think that now it's one thing when Shaq can't shoot free throws, but he's the most dominant. Freddie Freeman's gone. Let me say this again. If Freddie Freeman is gone, it's going to be Ronald Acuna Jr. show. And Kevin, like you just said, it's one thing to have cameras on you because you that young superstar. It's another thing to win, lose, or maybe they coming to Ronald. And he has to learn to be like, look, man, that's one thing that Freddie Freeman don't get enough credit for. I had to shoulder the load. And I was with the Braves when they was awful. And I was still a good player. And I never made it about my teammates. I never made it about the team, never pointed the finger. So I think Ronald Acuna, I mean, he's learned from the best, man. They're going to give it to guys like Austin Riley and Ozzie, but it's going to be Ronald Acuna. And who knows, Kevin? And I know this, the Yankees got a 19-year-old budding superstar. He's already learned English because he know he's going to have to do it. So think about that, man. I'm learning English. I can swing the bat. Who knows? That might help him, come along a little quicker because them questions going to be coming in hot.
Absolutely. Well, let's take three. We do it every day at this time. We've got more to come. Ben Ingram, Braves Radio Network, will join us when we return. It's 3 and Out on the Southern Pigskin Radio Network.
This is Marty Smith from ESPN, and you're listening to 3 and Out with Ben, BJ, and Kevin.
Good to have you back here, 3 and Out on the Southern Pigskin Radio Network. Kevin, BJ, and Ben, glad you are with us here on the show. Of course, with our next guest, we'd love to be talking about games on the field. We're just not there yet in the part of the negotiations. Ben Ingram, Braves Radio Network, joining us here on the show. Ben, welcome. Thanks for joining us. Obviously, baseball fans have been following the back and forth, the owners and players, and you see fans going back and forth. Or are you on the player side? Or are you on the owner's side? I think at the end of the day, though, right? We all just want baseball. We want a better baseball to be as good a product as possible. We want everybody back on the field.
Yeah, we do. We want that immediately. And thanks for having me today, guys. I think most fans, and I would include myself in this, are on the side of exhaustion. To be quite honest, it's something that we knew was coming, and given what we saw 2 years ago with a 60-game season due to COVID, and then knowing that this was coming for 2022 and experiencing this and having the unknown of when games will actually be played, there's definitely a level of exhaustion there that fans are ready to see come and go. And if you really branch out further than what's happening in the world of baseball and go to the world itself, I think you'd like to have something that can take your attention off the tension that's taking place globally, and baseball would be a great answer for that.
Ben, I know for a while fans have said, well, listen, if you miss some spring training games, that's okay, but I don't want to lose any regular season games. Now you have this apparent deadline of Monday. How close do you think we are to not having a 162-game season?
I think we're very close. I really do. I know that when it comes to these two sides, I wish I were more informed than I actually am. When it comes to a lot of the fine details of everything that's being negotiated, only the people in those rooms really have an idea exactly what's going on. All we can do is just go by what's being reported and try to make our own conclusions. And when it's the final week of February, as it is right now, and we're not anywhere close to being down in Florida, that tells me we're going to be missing regular season games. I know that if they were to put a deal together here between now and Monday, that would be great, first and foremost. But what's the next plan? I think lots of dominoes will be falling very quickly at that point. How long is spring training? Your next question is, do you start opening day when you normally would? Is the first month of the season going to look like spring training 2.0? I don't know. I know that if you start to take games away and we go to playing 154 or 148 or 140 or whatever that number may be, then players going to have prorated salaries like they did 2 years ago. And I can understand the players' frustrations because we've known all along that this lockout was taking place. That started December the 1st, and there were no real negotiations between then and really the first week of February, nothing that was sustainable. Now, all of a sudden, they're trying to cram at the last moment. And I can understand the frustrations on both sides, but I certainly understand the frustration of the players, knowing that all this time that they were locked out by the owners, that's been going on since December, and deals could have been done or at least negotiated long before now. But that's where we are. And when it comes to this, these players don't want to see prorated salaries like they saw 2 years ago. So they want to get a deal done, but they want the deal to be as close to favorable for them as they can possibly get. And in the meantime, people like you and me and the rest of the fans, we just wait because we don't have a seat at the table, and that's unfortunate.
And Ben, you talk about the lockout starting, but back in December 1st, we are a year removed or so from the COVID stricken season. Negotiations aside, how big of a disconnect is it right now between the players and the owners? I know they're at the bargaining table, but there's a big time disconnect with just who they think is actually the product, and obviously the product telling the guys who supply the product, hey man, we understand what our worth is. We just trying to make sure we do it not for the Mike Trouts of the world. We're trying to do it for player 24 and 25 on the roster.
Sure, and this is nothing new in baseball. If you really want to look at labor disputes between players and owners, this goes back 100 years. This is nothing new. It's just there's more and more and more money on the table the further you get down the road. And where you have now is you got lots and lots of money, hundreds of millions of dollars that are up for negotiation. I feel like these two sides are very far apart. I feel like they live in different worlds. I feel like they're very disconnected from one another, and that's very unfortunate, but that's the reality of it all. And I know that I feel like this is the case. I feel like the owners know they need the players, and I feel like the players know that they need the owners. What they both need ultimately are the fans, because they're not making a dime without the fans. It's the fans who come to the stadium. It's the fans who support these teams. And they need to understand that the product needs to be as good as it possibly can be and attractive as it possibly can be for the fans. So that continues. We love the game. I think for the common fan, you just want a deal to get done. I don't care if the players feel like they won or the owners feel like they won. I just want the game. And at that point, the fans win. And so long as the fans win, then everybody wins, in my opinion. And I think that's what needs to be the goal here, is knowing that whatever they do, they need to do it as quickly as humanly possible, or else you run the risk of tarnishing the game, similar to what you saw in 1994. And there are a lot of people who never came back to the game from that. That's very unfortunate. And that's the last thing they want is having that on their hands right now. I'll say this as well. I understand where these two sides are coming from. I mean, you think about the players, they want to better their situation for right now, but they also know that once this CBA is done, that could last several years. You want to leave the game in as good a hands as humanly possible for the next generation of ball players who come in, and leave it better than how you had it. For the owners, it's a very similar set of circumstances. They want to continue to grow the game and make sure that this game is an attractive business product and one that they continue to benefit financially on. So there's definitely a lot to be decided, and both sides are doing the best that they can to make sure it's favorable to them.
Ben Ingram, Braves Radio Network, joining us here on 3 and Out. And Ben, I think from the fans' perspective, you look at both sides kind of not being willing to budge, at least publicly. And most people sit back and say, look, we get everybody wants their money, but how do you get to a point where somebody looks like we want to look out for ourselves, but also the league, in so much that we've seen hesitation to have a salary floor. We've seen a lot of back and forth on the cap, where it seems like, hey, on one hand, you are handing out 40, in some cases $50 million deals to players. And on the other hand, you gave that to one player, but there are franchises who aren't spending that much on 26 guys on the roster. Wouldn't that be the number one thing to get fixed, so you don't have such a disparity in teams who financially aren't trying as hard as other teams to try to go out and win?
Yeah, sure. I think that's definitely part of the issue. I think for players, they want to know that there's going to be compensation there, and fair compensation. And it's one thing to have teams like the Dodgers, Yankees, and Red Sox who will spend north of $200 million on a roster for each year. But they want to eliminate teams like what we've seen in recent years with the Pirates or the Astros or others who might have had a payroll of $13 to $20 million. Now, it's hard to argue against that strategy because let's take the Astros, for instance, in 2016, 2017, whatever it was. Actually, no, I'm sorry. Let's go back further than that. They won the World Series in 2017, 2013, 2014. They had a very, very low payroll. It wasn't like that very long, and I don't perceive that as being a humongous issue for Major League Baseball. Easy for me to say because I'm not a player, because the teams that do that, it doesn't seem like they do that annually. They do that for a short amount of time. They rebuild, and next thing you know, they're spending money because they're making money and they're winning baseball games. That worked for Houston. That worked for Chicago. That worked here in Atlanta, going back to what we saw in 2015 and 2016. So I know that's definitely a point of contention there. I think the biggest one, and I think Major League Baseball has acknowledged this. I know that they have, because they've offered as much as $95 million for the pre-arbitration bonus pool. And I understand that being something that the players would like to see resolved. I think that's a very fair thing. We all know that there are a lot of teams benefiting from players that are making league minimum. That's the way that it goes. You could say that about Austin Riley with the Atlanta Braves this year, when he was making around $700,000 this year, a little bit higher than league minimum. And the guy on the other side of the diamond from him making $22 million a year. Well, both guys put up MVP-like numbers. And therefore, it makes lots of sense for there to be a pre-arbitration bonus pool for such players like Austin Riley and other young guys who are playing at a much higher rate than what they are being paid, considering what some of the other big-time contracts look like. So I think that's very fair. Right now, it seems like the two sides are about $20 million apart on that deal. I think the owners offered as much as $95 million a year in a pre-arbitration bonus pool. The players like to see that at $115. So a lot of these issues, there are 3 or 4 issues that are really standing out as the last issues between the two sides. I think that's one of them right there. Obviously, this going back and forth over draft picks and a draft lottery is something that they'd like to see resolved as well. But all big time issues, and unfortunately, the two sides are very far apart right now.
Ben, obviously, with no agreement, you haven't been able to have free agency. And Freddie Freeman, the speculation continues. Obviously, nobody's been able to talk or do anything. How extra complicated or dramatic, I guess, has this lockout made a situation like Freddie Freeman's?
That's a really good question. And I think it's one that Major League Baseball is relying on upon ending this lockout to bring positive attention to the game. And the reason I say that is, let's go back to 1994 when you had the players' strike. The following year, you had Cal Ripken breaking Lou Gehrig's all-time consecutive games played streak. You had steroid-era baseball where home run figures are through the roof, and people came back to the game, and they were able to pass on that black eye that could have been sustained significantly longer than it actually was. I wonder what this will look like, because this is going to be a free agent bonanza. And for the owners who would worry about this being a sustained black eye on the game, they can say, well, the second we lift this lockout, you're going to see a bonanza of free agency, lots of money being spent, which is going to generate lots of interest, lots of news, and lots of positive attention towards the game to see where players are going to land. I think that's something that they're relying on. I would imagine that if I were a general manager, while that might be slightly exciting, thinking about how fast and furious that all could be, I think at the same time, it's got to be nerve-wracking, especially if you're a team like the Atlanta Braves, who has a franchise player in Freddie Freeman that's out there dangling in the midst of free agency. Who knows where he's going to land? They say that these teams are not allowed to communicate with players, and I believe that's the case. But it's also not going to shock me at all if all of a sudden the lockout is lifted and within 3 to 6 hours you see big time deals being announced, as if they just threw these things together in 3 to 6 hours. I would say you're naive if you believe that it happened that quickly. So I don't want to speak on things that I don't know fully about, but at the same time, I feel like this is going to be pretty wild as soon as the lockout ends. And what that means for Freddie Freeman is anybody's guess. I think it all depends on Freddie and exactly what he wants to do. I know that for the Braves, they don't want to go to a 6th year in that offer. I wonder how reluctant other teams are going to be when it comes to a 6th year for a 32-year-old. I still think he has several very good seasons left as a big leaguer, but it would make sense if there are some teams that are a little bit hesitant to go to a 6th year for a guy that at the end of that contract will be 38 years old. So I've tried to remain optimistic when it comes to Freddie, but at the same time, nothing's going to shock me right now. I have no inclination one way or the other which way he's going to go, after feeling for the longest time in my gut he would end up being a Brave. As it stands now, I have no idea how this thing will play out.
And Ben, I know you keep referencing the '94 season when you talk about the lockout. How much can MLB ill afford to kind of have a lockout now and start missing games when everything is so sensationalized? When you think about social media and people want their sport, how much can they not are not allowed to lose those eyes, lose those viewers? Because like you said, we easily move on from things now. If they're not playing and something else takes their place, how bad could it get for them when they do decide to come back?
Well, the good news is financially the game has been in a really good place for a while, and I can see that through TV rights and those numbers being what they are, and brand new stadiums going up all over the country around Major League Baseball, tons of brand new facilities. Teams are making money. They have lots of streams of revenue, and they're doing well. That said, that doesn't mean you want to take any kind of a hit. Even if you think you can absorb this hit, even if you play, let's say you play 120 games this year. Let's go worst case scenario. Let's say you only play 120, you lose 40 games. I still feel like the owners would say, well, we can probably absorb that. Even if you feel like that's the case, no one wants that kind of bad publicity. No one wants to be the sport that is viewed as the selfish, greedy game. People have the NFL, they have college football, they have college basketball, college baseball's taken big steps forward. The NBA, there are lots of other platforms of sports that have not had really any labor issues at all. And when people look back at it and say, well, you got a lockout going on right now, you had a strike in 1994. For those who are old enough to remember 1981, there was a lockout that year where they did not play a full season. People don't want that continuing issue. Ultimately, that's going to affect your bottom line. And while major league teams might be in a very good place for it right now, you want to keep the game trending in the right direction. Keep putting up year after year after year of growth and revenue and finding new ways to create revenue. And this is a stain on the game if they're not able to resolve this, because the last thing anybody wants is to invest their time, their money, their energy into a sport that every 6, 8, 10, 12 years is going to have a labor dispute.
Ben Ingram, Braves Radio Network, our guest here on 3 and Out. Ben, really appreciate the time. Thanks so much.
Thank you, fellas. I appreciate it.
Appreciate it. Ben Ingram joining us here on 3 and Out. We're coming back with more all across the Southern Pigskin Radio Network.
Hi there. This is Steve Spurrier, University of Florida, South Carolina, and Duke coach, and you're listening to 3 and Out with BJ, Ben, and Kevin.
Again, thanks to Ben Ingram for joining us here on 3 and Out. And of course, you talked about the end there about Freddie Freeman. And BJ, I know that has been something that you have been concerned about for a number of months, weeks during this thing of, would you lose Freddie Freeman? And Ben saying there at the end, hey, I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen. I think there's a lot of people that don't know what's going to happen with this. And anytime there's a prolonged period of non-negotiation, which is what we're in right now, and certainly you weren't able to get something done when you were able to negotiate. I think a lot of people were saying, well, I don't know what's going to happen. And without Freddie Freeman saying this is where my mind's at, and of course, he's not going to come out publicly and be like, oh, I definitely want to stay in Atlanta, because that hurts his negotiating power,
Sure.
obviously as well. I think everybody's just sitting back and waiting and seeing what happens with Freddie Freeman and the Braves. And again, I think part of the job Alex Anthopoulos has done is, would it hurt if you lost Freddie Freeman? Would it make the fan base upset if you lost Freddie Freeman? Sure. But the fan base also lost John Smoltz. The fan base also lost, Tom Glavine, and they recovered. I think they
didn't lose those guys in their prime, man. Like, that's what we were talking about the other day is I understand your point. And I've heard a lot of people say, well, you're worried about the Albert Pujols contract. Well, I don't think that's a fair parallel, because what Freddie Freeman reportedly, I mean, we haven't heard, but what we've seen reportedly is Freddie Freeman wants 6 years. To compare that to the Albert Pujols contract, Albert Pujols' contract was 10 years. So I don't think that's a 40% increase you're making in a parallel. So for people who say that, I don't think that's fair. Listen, with any contract, the organization is going to have hesitation. Ben, I've learned a lot about contracts through you and what you dealt with. I understand that when you're talking about 36, 37, 38, but I also understand that you're talking about a generational guy, like a Chipper Jones, like we hope Ronald Acuna and maybe others will be. And I think at 32 years old, coming off of potential MVP type production and an MVP season before that, and it's not like he's sometimes you see I know you're talking about Barry Bonds, but sometimes you see the dramatic decrease for power hitters as they get into their mid to late 30s. Freddie Freeman is not a power hitter. He is not a 40. It's not like if he has a 20% reduction in home runs, that's going to be crippling to the organization and is going to change the dynamic of the player he is. Freddie Freeman's a gap hitter and a singles hitter and a doubles hitter. And I don't think that the natural depreciation you would expect from kind of a 6'5", 240-pound power hitter that's hitting 500-foot home runs, I don't think that's necessarily going to apply as dramatically to a player like Freddie Freeman. And I think that, yes, the Atlanta Braves will still be very good if they lose Freddie Freeman. Yes, you will still have great players, maybe even the best player, one of the 2 or 3 best players in baseball, in Ronald Acuna. But I also think you're kidding yourself if you don't look at what Freddie Freeman's meant, not only in terms of his macro production, but in moments when you had to get out of a slump, when you had to have the extra base hit, when you had to have, a momentum play. And sometimes those 7, 8, 9 sequences in a season are the difference in making the playoffs, not making the playoffs. And I think there's great value in having players. Ben, you mentioned that Freddie Freeman was with the Braves when they stunk. He helped them kind of move from, you're not going to make the playoffs, so you're in the playoffs. Now you can't win the playoffs. Now you're in the playoffs and you're winning. Now you're winning a World Series. I think having that perspective on the team is valuable. And I think at the end of the day, if the difference in having 5 more years of Freddie Freeman means you have to pay for a 6th year of Freddie Freeman, I think that's worth it. I do. And I understand that 85, 90% of the time you get into contract negotiations with guys in their early 30s, you probably do side with we're not giving you more than 2 or 3 years. But I think with guys like Freddie Freeman, Chipper Jones, I think it's a little bit, I think those guys are the exception to the rule. And I understand that John Smoltz went and played for like the Red Sox, and Tom Glavine went to the Mets of all teams, but that was very late in their careers, like very, very late, if not the 40s, the late 30s, maybe even the early 40s. Freddie Freeman's going to be an all-star for the next 4 or 5 years. And I just think if the difference is 1 year, if you're talking about 1 year, I think the 5 years before that are worth that 1 year.
Yeah, BJ. But the whole thing about it is, man. I mean, that's why we're not in front offices. Front office can't make emotional decisions. They can't do it based off how much you love the player, how much the players meant to your franchise. It's about business sense. And the thing about it is
Let me ask you this, Ben. But Ben, to the point about business, because I agree with you. Kevin and I were just talking about during the break how everybody every year wants everybody back on their teams. You develop a relationship with the players. But aside from the we like Freddie Freeman, are you getting a better first baseman in the next 3 years if you get rid of Freddie Freeman?
No. And some
you're getting worse, not only in the short term, but in the moderate term. And maybe, we don't know, maybe when he's 35, 36, 37, he's not the same player. But I think there's volatility with every player you pay.
Yeah,
every player. I mean, Ben, when you first got into the league, did you know what kind of player you were going to be 4 years later? I mean, I think any projection of 4 or 5 years is tough.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is, BJ, just because you're not getting the first base, just because you're not getting the best first baseman in baseball, doesn't mean you're getting worse. You're not getting a better player at that position, but we're talking about collectively as a team. Freddie Freeman has been the best first baseman in baseball before this year, and he just won a World Series because Alex Anthopoulos said, "I can't build my team around one dude. I can't do it." You still got like the thing. So the thing is, when you talk about Austin Riley, I mean, he did a quantum leap from last year to this year as far as like how Austin Riley and Ozzie and those guys were a part of the best infield in Braves history. You won the World Series without Acuna. You did it. You did it. So listen, will Freddie Freeman be missed? Yes. The hardest thing to do in pro sports is to be a lifer. That is hard to do, even when the players are incredible. Tom Brady is not a lifer, and he's the GOAT. Michael Jordan wasn't a lifer. So all I'm saying is you're going to hate to see him go. And in a sense, that's what he's supposed to do. You're supposed to make yourself so good to where they can't afford you. Like, hey, man, we can't afford to pay you. But you can't say this. They're going to make him the highest paid first baseman in baseball. That is all. You think of Freddie Freeman?
But Ben, to a certain extent, I think that reads more dramatically than it is because we've all talked about this. When you are the latest player to sign, even if you're not the best, just the way the contracts always move forward, when you're the newest guy to sign and you meet a certain threshold of relevancy, you normally are the most expensive, have the biggest, largest. So I think you say that and you go, oh my God, they gave him a ton. Look, I think that the next first baseman that's an all-star caliber first baseman to sign is going to have the biggest contract. Then the next, so I don't know that that's as kind of exclusively reflective of the Braves given the best possible contract at all, but or of all time, because I think that's going to apply across the board. I understand what you're saying, and look, if you don't re-sign Freddie Freeman, yes, you can bring in other guys. I get it, but I also think to be scared of 1 year. I mean, Kevin, you see this all the time, man. I know the scenario everybody's terrified of, right, is he's 37 years old. He is not the player he was, and you owe him $20 million.
Or $40 million.
Yeah, and I'm sure you need to negotiate that and be careful with that. But I also think that's happened. And I think if that's the worst case scenario, I mean, we've seen countless bad contracts with the Braves before with players who did not have the equity or the resume.
And it took the Braves a long time to get out from under those things.
But how many of those players were Freddie Freeman, who had maybe earned that benefit of the doubt? And what I'm getting at is even in that scenario, I mean, there are things you can do. Can you trade him and cut that in half? Can you trade him to a contender and cut? I understand the hesitation, but I think it's going to be tough if you don't have him. I do. I mean, you're not talking about, I know you mentioned a couple of players like Jordan at 39. You're talking about Freddie Freeman at 32 years old.
We'll see what the Braves do. Obviously, they got to get a deal first for the league and the players before we get there. We're coming back. It's 3 and Out on the Southern Pigskin Radio Network.
Hello, this is Artist Gilmore, Basketball Hall of Fame. You're listening to 3 and Out with BJ, Ben, and Kevin.
Good to be here on this Thursday. Kevin, BJ, and Ben, glad you're with us. Of course, Major League Baseball continues to have their talks, and we'll have some more on that coming up in the final hour. Also, Jamie Chadwell, we'll hear from him coming up in the final hour of the program, as well as, again, the NBA back tonight. We'll have the Hawks and Bulls coming up later tonight as well. So starting to pick up on the sports guy. That's what Ben was talking about. Hey, you don't have baseball back? Hey, NBA will be there to pick up the slack. NASCAR will be there to pick up the slack. College baseball will be there to pick up the slack. So people will find other things to occupy their time while you're squabbling over dollars.
They better get right. I mean, listen, the NBA, I mean, Kevin, you know how it is. We want MLB back on the way them A-Town down. We're going to need them Braves out there this season. Let's get right, owners.
The defending World Series
Talk about
champion. I had to throw that out there. With all the labor talk, you forget about that sometimes. We'll coming back. Final hour of 3 and Out around the corner all across the Southern Pigskin Radio Network.